Okay, so today we are reviewing my 2015 four-cylinder Mustang. As you can see, this is it right here. It's in a deep impact blue, which actually I had to drive 4 hours away just to get this color because I absolutely love it so much. Now, this is actually, like I said, my personal Mustang. We are going to be reviewing it today. I will be showing you things that I do like, things I don't like. Basically, all the information that you would want to know about buying this car, some of the good things, some of the bad things, all the things that you would want to know. I'm not going to waste any of your time on basically the nonsense stuff. So we're going to be reviewing it. So basically, let's talk a little bit about the car because my computer is updating for my mic. So hey, why not do the exterior? So a couple of things that I really do like about this car that you will notice about the older generation Mustangs, like the 2013 and 14s, and so like in back and forth, is that this car has a lot more lines. Now, I will say in person that this car looks a lot better than it does in pictures. Pictures do not do this car any justice. Now, just like some people, I was really skeptical about how this car looked when it first came out. So I'm right there with you guys too, so don't worry about that. Because one of the things I'm not a big fan of, and I wasn't a big fan of how the rear diffuser is actually the same color as the car. I don't know, I wasn't a big fan of that. Basically, but yeah, I think if you get it in the right color, the car does look amazing. Some colors do not look that good. Before this car, I had a 2013 V6 Mustang. And I will say, in that exact same color, it was like in a dark red. I forgot what it's like, red candy apple, whatever they call it. But the 2015 does not look good in that color anymore, at least in my opinion. I think we should be good. So let's go work on the car. So we're here today to talk about the car, and like I said earlier in the exterior showing, some people are gonna like this car for its looks, and some people won't because it is one of those cars. Now, like I said in the exterior view, that this car does not look good in pictures. I'm the first one to admit that because I don't even like my car in pictures. You can't really see all the different lines on the car until you see it in person. So if you really want to see and look at a 2015 Mustang for a serious everyday car, you might want to go look at it in different colors because that's going to be your best bet in order to actually see if you like it or not. So let's talk about some of the pros and cons of this car, and we're specifically talking about the four-cylinder. Now, we're going to talk about the things I don't like too much. The first thing, that it is a four-cylinder, and it's not that it's a bad thing, but even though this four-cylinder pushes out 310 horsepower, that's 10 more than the V6, the thing is, you're not really going to feel the 10 horsepower difference all too much, because the V6 is naturally aspirated, so it's going to feel more alive, where this has a turbo. Now, one of the problems you're going to run into is when you tell somebody you have a 2015 Mustang, and they say, oh, what engine do you have? And it's like, well, I got the new four-cylinder. Everybody's first reaction is, ooh, a four-cylinder? Nobody cares how much horsepower it has. When you say four-cylinder, the instant thought in their head is, it is a four-cylinder, which I understand. I didn't want the four-cylinder at first, but here's what Ford did. They made it to where if you want leather seats, a touchscreen, any of the creature comforts that you want in your everyday car, you would either have to get the four-cylinder or the GT, because they made it to where the V6 is now the most basic one you can possibly get. It doesn't have leather seats, you can't get a touchscreen with it, so there's very few things you can really do with the V6, and so they're really making the V6 that most basic version. And so that's definitely one of the main problems with this car, is that you have to explain it. You have to let everybody know that, hey, it still has more horsepower than the V6, and it still has some get up and go, don't get me wrong, but just explaining to your friends and your family that you have a four-cylinder, because that's the first thing that pops into their head is, oh, it's a four-cylinder. Which, again, I understand because it is a four-cylinder, and when you think of a Mustang, you don't think four-cylinder, and you really don't even think of a V6, you think of the GT. Now, if I could afford the GT, I easily would have bought one because you can't get that GT sound from any of the other engines, which is one of the main reasons why you want to buy a GT, because of the awesome sound, the more horsepower that you get, and it kind of resembles that, muscle car feel from back in the old days. So we talked about a little bit of the pros and, well, mainly the cons of the car so far. We haven't really talked about, pros for this car yet. Now, the first thing is, if you get the car in the right color, and like we said earlier, a lot of people didn't like the 2015 design at first. I was one of those people as well. Until I saw it in person, I started to fall in love with it. And one of the main things I love this car for is the interior. The interior is such an improvement over the 2013 and 14s. Trust me, because I had one. And if you've seen the inside of the 2013 and 14s, it absolutely looked horrible because it was mainly just so plain, and it didn't really feel like it was in touch with the 21st century new cars that you would see today from Toyota, Honda, things like that, and a lot of other Ford cars. Speaking of that as well, because Ford had some really good interior cars like the Fusion, things like that, but the Mustang was always kind of lacking in that point. Touchscreen, if you do want to get the 4-cylinder for the touchscreen, which I understand because having the big touchscreen here in the middle really does make the car look a lot better on the interior, in my opinion. Everything looks more proportioned, but you kind of get the sense that it's really not necessary to an extent, mainly because a lot of the things that the touchscreen can do, you can do right down here, like just a couple inches away. Like climate control, things like that can all be adjusted right here, but if you want it to be a touchscreen, you can change it here if you want, which I understand the point of having the touchscreen, but you want the touchscreen to add some new features to the car and ones that you can't really reach. So we are on some windy roads, mainly because this Mustang really does handle a lot better than the 13 and 14s, mainly because of the big thing they've been talking about is the independent rear suspension. And the reason that is a big deal is for an everyday driver, you want a comfortable car that when you hit a bump, you're not going to feel it as much. Now, you still feel every single bump that you hit in this Mustang, but you don't feel them as much as you did with the solid rear axle, mainly because your wheels are independent, and hence the independent rear suspension. If you don't know what that means, it's basically instead of a solid bar going across and connecting the two back wheels, you actually have basically the wheels are independent of each other, so when one hits a bump, the other doesn't. So if you don't know what that is, that's what it's for. It's meant to give you a better ride. Now, I've heard complaints that it's not as good for drifting and doing things like that, but let's be honest, how many people are going to use their Mustang for drifting? It's just one of those things to where you're not going to use it for it, so you need to make a car that's better for everyday driving rather than the one day you go out of the year to go drifting with it. So you really got to think of it from that point of view as well. And really, this 4-cylinder, I've watched a couple of reviews on this car as well before I bought it, and I want to give you my opinion on the front end because, one, I think the hood looks a little good. It looks okay, but having those big two fins really kind of distract you a little bit from how it looks. And you can also see that same design taken into the Fusion and into, what are those little hatchbacks called? The Fiesta. You can kind of see the same hood design just on a different scale, which I'm not sure if I like that too much. If you buy a Mustang, you're buying it for how it looks because it looks fantastic. Now, this car does do something that a lot of cars really cannot do, and it actually kind of competes with it on a supercar level. Now, I'm not talking about speed, I'm not talking about acceleration, I'm talking about looks. This car makes people turn heads, and that's something you want in a Mustang. A Mustang is something that you should be able to recognize as soon as you see it pulling around a corner, driving by. You need to know that it is a Mustang. Now, for some people, they're not going to know what Mustangs are. They're not big enthusiasts. There's a lot of people that aren't car people out there, but they still know what a Mustang looks like. So when they designed this one, they had to make sure it still had that Mustang feel and design to it, that immediately as soon as you saw it, you knew that it was the 2015, which is something that you definitely want in a car like this because the handling and the looks, they are great, but you also want a car that you can go out to every single day and go drive and have a great time, and also be happy to go out to your car every single day to drive it because, let's be honest, you have to live with this car. So if you want a good looking car, this is a good alternative to that. So one of the main things I kept seeing in reviews is how good this car is at handling the windy roads, and that's why we're on these roads, is because it's more fun. Now, one of the reasons why it is more fun is with the 4-cylinder, the engine is a lot lighter than a V6 or a GT because there's less cylinders, so the car is lighter in the front, which means when you turn the wheel, you can actually kind of get a more instant reaction from the car. Now, this is still a heavy car by a lot of means. It's heavier than the Scion FRS by a lot, and just different things like that. It's still a heavy car, but you can still have fun with this car, and that's the main thing as well with the 4-cylinder is, yes, would you rather have a GT? Most likely, but you're also going to run through a lot more gas because this also uses premium gas as well. But one of the great things about this car, though, is yes, you have to use premium, but you can also use regular fuel if you want. But if you want all 310 horsepower, you have to use the premium gasoline. So just kind of keep that in mind as well. So if premium is expensive, you can always go with the alternative and just give up some horsepower for it for better gas mileage and cheaper fuel. So if you're on a budget, you can still use regular fuel if you want, but if you, like I said, if you want all 310 horsepower, you have to use the premium fuel. So we talked about how good the interior is in this car because the interior is the biggest improvement. If I'm being honest, it is 99% of the reason why I bought this car, and that's because you actually want to be in this car now. It has comfortable seats, it has good support, you know, it feels like the car actually holds you in, and seats do, but you also have better creature comforts that you did, and how everything is actually designed. You feel like they actually took their time doing it this time. They didn't just say, well, we have to have those circular gauges, we have to make sure we have those things, and they didn't revolve the entire car around those things, but they made it sure they added those in because those were important to the Mustang heritage. But at the same time, you needed to improve the interior of the car so much because it just wasn't that good. It was so plain when you got into it. You didn't feel like you were driving anything special. You didn't feel like you're in a 21st century car when it came to the interior. You just felt like you were in an old classic car, which isn't a problem, but if you want a car you're driving every day, you want something that you can actually enjoy sitting in because that's where you're spending all your time when you're driving your car. So I have, you know, great air conditioning, I have great seats, a great dash, and everything's just such more improved finally, and that's really all you can ask for. Stopping points when it came to the pros and cons of this car, in my opinion, because this is a very good looking car. It does its job, and people know that it's a Mustang. I've gotten so many compliments on this car just of how it looks. Again, but one of the main things that would make you turn away from the 4-cylinder is the fact that you have to explain it. It's just one of those things that you kind of get tired of doing when you tell somebody you have a 2015 Mustang and you have to explain that you have a 4-cylinder. And a lot of people don't understand that it does have more horsepower than a V6, but by 10. And I don't understand why people are going like, well, it does have more horsepower than the V6. Yes, it does, but 10 horsepower is not going to make that much of a difference that you're going to notice. Now, if you do want to get a tune for this car, you definitely can. And I don't suggest that because it would void your warranty, but one of the guys at the dealership told me, you know, if you do get a tune for it, make sure you get a tune that you can set back to factory default. That way, if there is something wrong with your car, you know, you can actually just set it back to default and it's like nothing happened. That way they never know. So one of the big problems with this car is the fact that the gearbox, when you put it in sport mode, does not like to shift. Now, what I mean by that is if I want to put it in sport mode, we now have pedal shifters instead of the little button on the gear lever now. So if I want to put it in sport mode, I can. But one of the things that this car does not like to do that the 2013 V6 like to do, and I'm guessing it's the same thing for the 2014 as well, but if you do not shift at the precise time the engine wants you to shift, it definitely hesitates. And that was actually something I didn't like about this car when I put it in sport mode for the first time, because if I put it in sport mode, I want to be able to control when I shift. That's a really big thing. But when you don't shift at precisely the right time the engine wants you to, it definitely hesitates. It basically like saying, come on, hey, you really need to shift. Which if I want to hold a rev, I can't do that in this car because it's saying, hey, you really need to shift. I'm not liking this. I'm not sure if it's going to be the same thing in the V6 or in the GT if you put it in sport mode for those, because I'm talking about the automatic GT if you're going with that as well. Now keep in mind I do have an automatic, so just kind of keep that in mind. But it's just one of those things to where it gets really annoying when you want to put it in sport mode and just have a little bit of fun and kind of hear the rev out a little bit, but the car doesn't want to do it. The car is saying, hey, we need to slow down a little bit. You need to learn to shift when I want you to. Oop, missed that turn. Oop. So that's definitely something that I'm not a big fan of this car on, because the engine just feels really bad at wanting to actually be in sport mode. It doesn't feel like it wants to do it. It wants to be at a comfortable speed. It wants to be in automatic mode. Now, that could be because it is a 4-cylinder. That's why I'm saying I'm not sure if it's a GT or a V6 problem. So if it is, you know, that's fantastic. So if you're not going to have that problem in a V6, go straight ahead. So not everybody's going to have that problem. I think we touched on all the points that I wanted to talk about on this car. We went over the pros and cons of it, you know, a lot of the good things, a lot of the bad things. So this car definitely is worth the money if you want to buy one, but just keep in mind that you will have to explain that you have a 4-cylinder to all your friends, because nobody's going to want to just say, oh, you have a 4-cylinder, that's awesome. Nobody's really going to say that, because even though you get better gas mileage, you're sacrificing sound and horsepower from a GT. So really, we touch on all the points for this video, so hopefully you enjoyed this video. So if you want to see more videos, I will be having more videos coming out soon. So thank you all for watching. It is greatly appreciated as always. I will talk to you guys later. So bye-bye.